My name is Basim, and I'm very happy to welcome you to this EclipseCon talk from a Swabian car manufacturer to an open source addict. And I have a pleasure of introducing Martin Haserbach, the CEO of Daimler TSS, who's been with Daimler TSS ever since 2004, and I believe the CEO as of 3.5 years, I believe. Now I can tell you that Martin has been a passionate supporter of the whole open source movement within Daimler. Over to you, Martin.
And I have the pleasure to introduce Basim Madegi. He is since 7 years at Daimler TSS, and he is a software engineer by day and an open source hacker by night. And also, we're very proud of, he's our representative at the Eclipse Foundation. So thank you very much. I would like to start this call to introduce you about Daimler TSS because we are an internal company inside Daimler AG. The most famous brand of Daimler AG are our cars, our vehicles, the Mercedes-Benz cars. And we are an internal subsidiary with around about 1,200 employees, founded in 1998. And we are a 100% subsidiary, so we are just working internally inside the Daimler AG. What are we doing? We are our heartbeats for software technology, for software engineering. And we are purely focused on the digital transformation of our brand. So our cars getting more and more digital, all the apps, all the business processes surrounded in the production, in the mobility concepts, all these things we are very focused on and where we push our company forward through this digitalization. And I would now, going forward to the next slide, where I would like to start in the history. We are the founder of the vehicle over 100 years ago, and we are pretty good in building cars. So we are well known how the production process have to be much more efficient and how an enterprise IT organization looks like in the past. So we are very experienced in this, but we feel that there is something changing. And so if we are going to the next slide, we see that our vehicles are getting more and more like interacting with computers. But we know that the requirements which you have regarding a vehicle, which are very important for us regarding safety and security, all the things are also fitting in a modern world, in a digital world. And we think that this has to be changed, how we build our enterprise IT. If you look in the past, we see our enterprise IT act like with no internal software engineer. So the last 20, 30 years, there was no really a software engineer who builds software in detail enterprise IT. We have bought software, property software with external companies. And this was not an approach where we feel like where we can act in the future. So, and also we get this feedback as example, if you have, as a managing director, interacting with the customer, we get this feeling that our customers have a new expectation regarding digital. And you see this here in our very famous new EQS and the upcoming EQE with this hyperscreen, that their expectation, which they have from the digital device, which they know of their mobile phones, they are copying this expectation exactly one-to-one to the vehicle, and we have to change inside the company a lot of things to fulfill this regarding speed, regarding quality. Instead of quality, one attribute, like I've mentioned before, security is a very important topic for us. And you see this here, which we have, where the differentiation between the mobile world and with mobile apps and the vehicle. If your app on a mobile phone crash, that would be maybe acceptable. You restart it, that's okay. But in the vehicle, to be honest, if you have an app in the vehicle, it's not acceptable as crash, and it is not our. We have to have the aim that to have the safe car from the physical world and also in the digital world, and that's maybe a difference where you think about the customer behavior, how it's copied from the mobile world to a vehicle world where we see the vehicle as a mobile device. So security is a very important topic for us. And they're coming from the past where we know how an enterprise IT was organized, like buying software, external proprietary software, and not doing things on ourselves. We came to the point that we have to change something. So 10 years ago, there was a kind of a process was changing from different perspectives where we look later on, where we say, okay, we cannot act this in the future. We feel more and more that the vehicle, all the digital products around are much more relevant for competition regarding also our new competitors. And so let's have now a look, maybe more in interaction, because we want to provide you a different perspective. As you know, I'm the CEO and Basim is a software engineer. So let's start into an interaction, Basim. What the engineer thought, how they worked, how the old development process affected them, and what was the outcome?
Right. Well, a fantastic question, and a debate that could use a lot more time. But thinking back, I know that most of the software engineers that joined the automotive industry about 15, 20 years ago, they knew more or less that they are going to be dealing with all the stacks. I mean, due to the reasons we hear, safety, security, certification, they knew that the software stack will have a lot of constraints. And this was something you were aware of when you joined. But this was okay, I think, some 20 years ago. As time went by, you could see how the IT world is developing rapidly and is going past by you very quickly. So you're sitting there still developing for the specification, which are 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, and the entire IT is exploding. On top of that, we really didn't have the need to develop software for the connected world. When most of the vehicles were offline, and this was something that we saw happening, and you were wondering, when are we going to get there? So back then as well, we don't have to fool anyone. Open source was already being used in every stack of IT within the industry. It was never intended to be so. So whenever an engineer wanted to bring FOSS, we had to go through a lot of legal hoops before we got those approved and deployed and ran them in our software. So there were not that many, and they had to go through a lot of processes before we could do it. Now, when it came down to patching them, changing them, we had to keep those in-house. I mean, most of the engineers had a copy or a few of those in-house, and you knew that you couldn't push back those changes. So what happened that we kept these sometimes for the entire life cycle of the car because we needed them. And that was, if you think about it, a bit crazy now. And one of the funny things is a lot of times we were all asked, isn't there a proprietary alternative to this open source solution you're trying to put in here? Which is, again, something you can't expect nowadays. So, Martin, this was a bit of an old wound. It has healed since then, but still my question is, how comes we were so defensive towards open source back then?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Looking back, I think it was a kind of unknown. So from a managing director perspective, to be honest, there were a lot of things coming up, which I thought we have external partners, and something going wrong. I want to go to a lawyer and find a solution there, and maybe talking about penalties and something like this. And the people like you have told us, no, in the open source world, you don't have any penalties or something like this. If the quality expectation of the software is not like your requirements, which you have 3 years before specified, and all the things. So it was a kind of the unknown world, and maybe we are not, we didn't get this really a step forward in the unknown world. But Basim, one question back to you. The struggle of contributing back and looking at open source as part of standard demand, how was giving back in the past?
Right. So from an engineer's perspective, I mean, a few years ago, as open source kind of exploded, you knew that to be a successful engineer, you needed to have an open source portfolio. And this was kind of your image to the world, if you want to put it that way. So what happened is, for those engineers who were more leaning more towards the open source and used it during the work time, the question arose, how do I contribute back? Well, you knew that you would not be able to do that during your work time. I mean, it wasn't official, right? So what happened is that I went home, or we went home, and we did that in our private time. I mean, a lot of these projects were just fantastic stuff. And if you really love IT, you probably just love contributing to it too. So this was something that's happening, but it was a bit of a tricky thing, Martin, because I go home and I need to make sure that I separate between my work time and my private time. There's the question of intellectual property and all of the stuff that it brings with it. And as we became more active in these projects, you naturally tend to take a maintainer role in them. but we couldn't really do that, because then you have to steer it. And in which direction do I want to steer this? I cannot do that for my daytime job. And this was, of course, a bit of a struggle. So sadly, a lot of us had to drop those projects and just take something else just to scratch the itch. A bit of a missed opportunity, but I'm glad we have now changed those. Which brings me actually to the question, Martin. I know open source has been active now in the industry for almost 20 years. How comes we adopted it so late?
I didn't, quite good question. I didn't think we didn't get the potential. We didn't see the potential out of this open source world and also inner source world. Use and contribute, giving back to the community and all these things. So we were really focused on this transformation IT, acting with external service software companies, where we bought software, and also we didn't get the signal. So as example, as we know, the competitors, like we understand how they built their software, how the software strategy was, we thought, hey, it's completely different. And we recognized we are too slow. We have to change that, have the same goal. But to be honest, coming back, security is a very important process. So how do we bring in back the security aspects, the certification prospects? And things like this, employee perspective, people like you asked us, where are your open source project? What is your open source footprint? What is your inner source repository? Things like this, and we didn't have an answer for this, to be honest, and this was not acceptable anymore. And that was coming to the point where we changed something. Also, we together changed something, and that's where I'm very proud whether I have to have employees like you, that we changed something. And now I would like to go on with this. How do we change this? And inside TSS, because we are a subsidiary, I can decide things as a managing director by myself. We made some fast decisions. So we said, okay, this is not any acceptable. So we really established a steering committee. So as first we said, okay, now bring the people on the table, the software engineers. I don't want to have any managers there. I don't want to really have the people who are directly impacted by this rules, which cannot really live in the open source and in the source world. So we changed things. We invested budget. We put some time on the table to say, okay, now there's really blocked time for interacting in the inner source open source world. We invested a lot of analysis regarding licenses, which kind of licenses we have to use, which we don't want to use, and things like this. So this was one side on the where it changed something. We were also in a lucky situation that we have a CIO who is very also interested in open source world, and where we come together and also talk to him, though we have to change something. And he come from the top. He said, okay, for Daimler AG overall, with all these subsidiaries and different brands, he said, okay, FOSS is one key pillar of my strategy. And this comes to the good situation if you come from the bottom up, if you have employees like you who want to change something, who want to bring in and want to be part of this change. And also from a top-down approach, where your CIO says, okay, FOSS is the main pillar of our strategy, and we invested time, money, attention, and also focus. And if this both come together, this both movement, then you are really effective and change things. Because I think that was not longer the time to say, I want to buy a software external and use it, a proper software. That was not really attractive. And you don't want to go to your CIO and telling them that you start this project. He just accepted stories like, let's go now into the open source first, and things like this. So there was kind of change. And I think, Basim, you have also a very delicious recipe where you also want to share now how to change.
Right. Thank you. Well, I do, as a matter of fact. So this is the story of Tiramisu, and I want to share it with you because, as Martin said, we tried to push the strategy to the entire Daimler Group, because we knew that a big company with a lot of subsidiaries will have to be successful in open source as a whole. Otherwise, we'll not have the success we are striving to have. So when we were trying to push this forward, we came across a lot of people who were unaware of what exactly was FOSS and how they should think about it. So we came up with the story of the tiramisu, and it goes something like this. Now, imagine I just came up with a recipe of the tiramisu for the first time, and I would go and make it public, share it with everyone and say, here, take it for free. You would take that recipe, you will make the cake, and you will have a brilliant idea to improve upon it by putting some magical sparkles on top, for example. Now you have two choices: keep that, maybe make it proprietary and sell it, or give the magic sparkle recipe back and see if the world can improve upon that and use it. So this was our sweet recipe for our meetings to make them a bit more successful. And I can tell you, it used to go very well as soon as we had that story as an opener. But now I actually want to share with you a recipe, and this is a very high level recipe for how an industrial company can start its open source strategy. It's very high level. It will give you the hints that you require, and I think it actually makes sense to go this way because this is the essence of the last few years for us. So the recipe goes something like this. More or less, your whole strategy, I'm assuming you're starting from scratch, is will start by finding the people who are already active in open source one way or another. So you will probably have contributors, users, and those guys are waiting, sleeping patiently for you to do that shout out. We want to start a FOSS movement. Find them, bring them to the table. So by far, these are the ones you want to use to build upon, the fundamentals, as a matter of fact. Once you have those base people in your group, you want to establish an official open source group or a FOSS group if your FOSS goes beyond open source. And one of the key success factors for us was to have a cross-functional group. What do I mean with cross-functional? I mean that you need people from your HR, from your governance, from your management, from your engineering, all across the board within this group. And there is an excellent reason for that. You will have to deal with very tough decisions if you want to push the open source strategy within your company. Those decisions will take time, and I can tell you the only way you can speed up this process is to have all the relevant people on board. This is one of the major things, and I would emphasize you do that from the beginning. So hopefully you have found motivated your people to sit around the table from across the company. Before you start developing your own strategy, I would highly recommend you build networking with the outside world. Look for mentors. Many have gone through this process before us, and they have excellent stories and lessons learned. So I would highly encourage you to go out there and say, hey, we are about to start open source, and we would very much like if someone came and told us what we could do wrong, what could speed up things. Everyone is more than happy to share their stories because the success of this open source is built upon having more support. So hopefully you find your mentor, and with your mentor, now you're ready to sit and see what is it you want from open source. What is exactly your goal there? Do you want to have better recruitment? Do you want to have visibility within the open source? Do you want to use open source for your marketing? Do you want to incorporate open source within your products? Are you thinking, do I buy products, or do I FOSS products? So once you find out what is it exactly you want from the open source, try and come up with some plans on how to push those forward. I want to build some software in the open source. Okay, do I already have something that can go out there? I want to recruit people through open source. I will make myself more visible. This is by far the toughest one, by the way. It takes time to figure out what is it exactly you want from open source. So I highly recommend that once you have your open source strategy, a lot of companies tend to do prototypes and case studies. I highly recommend you actually go and find those little weeds, the grassroots movements that are already doing some sort of open source, and feed them your strategy. So try to use that, because open source comes to fruition after years, sometimes even. And those guys are probably the ones that would deliver results much more rapidly than most of the other green field projects that you would start. So once hopefully you got those people really motivated and fed them your strategy, this is the time where you start drumming, and with drumming, I really mean you market the entire open source strategy down the company from top. Make sure that everyone understands that this is something that's here to stay and we want to build upon it. It's not something just a team does. So push that, drum, and market for it. This is absolutely necessary, I can tell you. People tend to first listen as like, interesting, but you want to keep doing that. And while you are drumming for this, so not all of these points are necessarily in a sequential order. The building of trainings and knowledge base and guidelines is something you should be doing from the beginning, but at this point you really have something to work upon. I highly recommend you look for ready-made trainings. There are plenty of them out there before you start doing this from scratch. And these trainings are something should be up to date and interesting for anyone who wants to be active with the open source. How to be a maintainer. This is not something you want to do from scratch again. While all of this is being done, this point 8 for me was a struggle, and I want to make sure that it's well understood. Enabling the company goes beyond defining a strategy. You want to make sure that your open source projects are well funded. Open source does not mean free. So making sure that you fund any project that's going to do something with the open source is crucial to your success. On top of that, just like us as a big company, you have a lot of policies, you have a lot of regulations that you have to follow. So you will set up processes, and processes tend to slow down the engineering side. Open source is a fast-moving horse. So our lesson learned was to automate as much as possible, and this is where we actually built a lot of TechGov for this purpose, and I highly encourage you to use TechGov for that as well. Coming to point 9, this is where you should be getting out of your shell. Open yourself towards the open source world, to the public, and you might feel vulnerable, but it's actually the crucial step of telling the world that I'm here now. Who else is doing open source? Can you share with us? This is where you look for people to work with. And this is where you join foundations like we did. That was exactly the same step for us. Now, all of this is well done and said, but this will not succeed if you cannot bring FOSS within the DNA of your company. It will always be a side project unless you make sure that your company has within its DNA FOSS. And this is where I'm going to share with you how we actually brought the FOSS into our DNA. We did this with the help of something we call the Dynaforce Manifesto. And I'm very happy to share this with you as a co-author of the FOSS Manifesto with my colleague Wolfgang. It's actually very simple, but a lot of thought went into this because this is something which is the fundament of what every employee and what every manager sees when they work with us. It's separated into 2 groups: the company principles, which are encourage FOSS, facilitate FOSS participation, advancement through FOSS, and FOSS visibility. So we think that those 4 key principles are very important to be within the company. And if everyone understands that this is what the company expects, you can go towards the employee side. What should every employee bring with them? They should prefer FOSS. So think open source first, then proprietary. Be an active FOSS citizen, contribute to FOSS, and finally be a responsible FOSS citizen. And all of these, I think, are the essences of what you need to have within the DNA of your company to be a successful FOSS player, more or less. But because we know that as an industrial player here, we will not succeed unless others are successful. So this is very funny because our success is based upon your success. We thought it would be really cool to share this with the world. And I'm really, really happy to share a template of this FOSS Manifesto with you. We took it and we said, hey, if this is something useful for any company, please do use it or build upon it. And I think if you can establish this within the DNA of your company, you're on the right track. So if you're interested, there's a link to the Mercedes-Benz open source page where you will find the original one, and we should be uploading the template version very soon over there for you to use. And with that, I think we have come to the end of our talk. I'm very happy to have been able to present this with Martin. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Basim.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. All right.
I think we asked the first question, Basim.
Yeah, we do have one question. I'm going to read it aloud, Martin, and maybe you can start by answering it. So the question is how to scale your success story to an industry-wide collaboration in the open, especially in such a competitive environment.
Yeah, that's a good question, Marvin. Let's start myself, and then I think you can add. Yeah, from managing director perspective, I think it's a pretty good question because we know we have antitrust law, so I think that's a very difficult thing to do, let's say, in a complete scale. I think everywhere where it's going to the customer and also where digital requirements, digital products are a competitive thing, between us and the competitors. I think it will not work. But I think in a vertical layer, we have a lot of different things where we can maybe work together, but always in a thing like antitrust law, which we have to consider.
Right. I think another very interesting thing that we had there was, as a big industrial player, when we wanted to get into the open source by ourselves, we had a lot of fears. I mean, there is so much uncertainty for a company that is so heavily invested in its intellectual property and all this stuff that comes with it. So we were kind of looking out there as like, which other big company is active in the open source? What are they doing? How are they benefiting from it? And as we looked, there weren't that many, but the one or two examples we found definitely helped us come out. And I think this is another thing we should pushing forward, that we ourselves can set those positive examples because we have seen the benefit in it. And we came to a realization, that our crown jewels are separate from the intellectual property that we contribute to in the open source. I mean, we build upon it. And by setting those positive examples, I believe we can actually make this an easier journey for the rest of the industry to join in. So that would be, more of us out there, we would definitely drag the rest out.
Okay, coming to the second question. Basim, I think a good question regarding you. So let me tell you, how is Dynaforce involved in the Eclipse Foundation? Basim.
All right, fantastic question. I love it because I have taken an active role in the Eclipse Foundation now. Daimler TSS, as a matter of fact, is the representative of the entire Daimler group within the Eclipse Foundation. So we bring our entire interest in there. And we actually really wanted to leverage Eclipse Foundation and support it, especially since their move to the European Union. It was a very strategic thing for us. We knew we were going in the open source for long term, and we needed someone who can support us here. There were a lot of laws and regulations happening here, and Eclipse Foundation, as a matter of fact, offers or helps us build the necessary platform for collaboration there. So we came in there now. We are kind of the beginners. I'm being a bit humble here. We did have ideas to contribute and build upon. We mainly started by using Eclipse products. But I'm really happy to say that after a year, we have our first 2 projects there within the Gaia X, the IDS, and this is just the beginning of the journey for us.
Great, Basim. Thank you. The next question.
Right. We might actually not have enough time to answer question 3. I'm going to hurry up with that one. So question 3 is Daimler TSS strategically aligned with the OSS strategy of Daimler AG? Or do you define the strategy for the whole Daimler group?
Yeah, let me just wrap this question. It's completely aligned because we're working very close together. Like mentioned before, our CIO supports really the FOSS strategy, and it's like a grassroots movement, a top-down movement that brings us things together. But not we are alone. Also, other subsidiary of Daimler AG and the Future Mercedes-Benz AG have a clear open source strategy, and this all plugs together. So we have one overall open source strategy, which we highly appreciate because it helps us if our top management until the board of directors, they support us really quite good in this way. So thank you very much. I think time is over. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Basim.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Martin.
Bye-bye.